What's happening? Happy hump day to you and yours. Thanks for joining me as always. It is very much appreciated. More and more news pouring out throughout the last few days as we get ready for more interviews to be conducted by the Patriots. We have so much going on. Don't forget to send your super chats. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to help us out. So let's start here. Some news about Bill Belichick came out today. Tom Pelissero from the NFL Network reported that Belichick was actually being contacted by NFL teams, multiple teams, to see if he would be willing to leave North Carolina. One of those teams, the Raiders. Tom Brady reportedly reached out to Belichick to see whether or not he'd be interested in being the Raiders head coach. So that came out a few hours ago. Diana Rossini from The Athletic has since dumped cold water on that report, saying Bill's staying at North Carolina. He's not returning to the NFL. He is out on the recruiting trail. So I think we could put the Bill Belichick back to the NFL story on the back burner, at least for this offseason and maybe forever. So it doesn't sound like Bill will be headed back to the league for 2025. Rossini also came out with a couple of other reports, and one of them was the fact that the Patriots will be interviewing Mike Vrabel in person tomorrow. Now, we knew that Vrabel was set to interview with the Patriots, and it was going to happen tomorrow on Thursday. And, of course, it's going to be in person because Vrabel has zero limitations. He can go and meet these teams in person. He is not currently contracted with a team, which is why he got out of that contract early with the Cleveland Browns. So he could go out there in person and have interviews. It gives him a leg up on everybody else who is currently employed by an NFL team. So Vrabel will meet with the Patriots tomorrow in person. Ben Johnson, Lions offensive coordinator, will meet with Robert Kraft. And Rossini specifically mentioned Robert Kraft. I don't know if that has any more significance or that's just the information she has, and it's going to be Robert Kraft solo doing a Zoom with Ben Johnson. I have no idea, but Ben Johnson will do a Zoom on Friday with Robert Kraft. So Vrabel tomorrow, Johnson on Friday. Let's talk about this head coaching search. Out front, I will tell you, Mike Vrabel's my number one target. Mike Vrabel is the guy that I want. I wanted Vrabel last year before we found out about Gerard Mayo's contract language and the fact that there was a succession plan already built in, okay? I wanted Vrabel last offseason. I want Vrabel this offseason. He's my number one pick. I would be very happy if they land him. Very happy if they land him. I would also say, just because Vrabel is my number one pick doesn't necessarily mean that I don't like a couple of other options. I would be fine with Brian Flores being the head coach of this team. I would be fine with Ben Johnson being the head coach of this team. But Vrabel is my number one guy, okay? He's my number one pick if we were drafting. He would be the dude that I bring in to help try to fix this organization and try to settle this circus. So I would be happy if Mike Vrabel's the guy. I'd be happy if Ben Johnson ends up being the guy. However, I am not happy with this coaching search, the details that we have heard. Now, this can change. It's all fluid, but it doesn't look like it's going to change whatsoever. It looks like the Patriots are going to interview four guys for this head coaching job. Two of them minorities, two of them not minorities. That looks like what this search is going to entail. Now, I'm happy they're interviewing Ben Johnson. They should be interviewing Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson and Vrabel, both those guys, top two candidates in this hiring cycle. Makes all the sense in the world to talk to those two gentlemen, bring them in for an interview, Zoom them, whatever you've got to do via league rules, and have the conversation with both of those guys because they are at the top of the list, and they should be at the top of the list. So I'm fine. I'm fine with interviewing Vrabel. I'm fine with interviewing Ben Johnson. I am happy that Vrabel is reportedly the favorite to get this job. But the rest of this search smells fishy. And I think many of you would agree with that. This search is not the kind of search I was hoping for. I was hoping for a bunch of interviews. I was hoping for interviews with the Aaron Glens of the world, the Liam Cohens of the world, and all the other names that have been thrown out there. Brian Flores, Cohen, Aaron Glenn, all of them, right? All those names. I thought it would be a great idea for the Patriots to book as many interviews this week as they possibly could have booked. And that's not what they're doing. We found out yesterday that Pep Hamilton and Byron Leftwich interviewed for the head coaching job. Come on now. There's no way on God's green earth that either of those guys is going to get this job. I know it. You know it. They even know it. There's no chance. There's absolutely no chance that Pep Hamilton gets the head coaching job or Byron Leftwich. Both of those guys have been out of the NFL since 2022. They're not even in the league right now, which is why I believe the Patriots interviewed them, because they're not handcuffed. You have to interview a couple of minorities in person to check the box, so to speak, with the Rooney Rule. And I hate it. I hate it. Yes, the rule is not perfect. The rule leaves the door open for something like this to happen. But this is not the intention of the rule, to just bring in a couple of guys that are out of the league because they're minorities, interview them, check the box, and move on to the other two dudes. That's not the way this is supposed to go. It's not the way it's supposed to happen. It feels like they just want to satisfy that Rooney Rule and get this thing done ASAP. That's why you bring in two minority candidates, quote unquote, to interview that haven't been in the league the last couple of years. It's pretty obvious, right? It's pretty obvious. The fact that you are interviewing only 4 people and 2 of them are those 2 minority candidates also speaks volumes. Also speaks volumes to what's going on here. All right, before I continue to talk about this coaching search, don't forget to do a few things that can help us. Click that thumbs up on the YouTube channel. Give us that like. More likes means more eyeballs. That's how we drive this algorithm to help us support this program. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to throw comments in as well. How do you feel about this coaching search? Are you the feeling of I couldn't care less? Doesn't really bother me? Or do you think this coaching search should have been handled differently so far, like I do? So don't forget to like, don't forget to comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Trying to get to 5,500 subscribers. We're now at like 5,250. So let's continue to push. Let's continue to move on and move forward with the likes, the comments, and the subscriptions as we get ready for a very, very, very busy offseason. No doubt about that. Gregory Brown jumps in and says, well, Leftwich Hamilton didn't have to take the interview. That's true, Gregory, but the interview does help them in a way. They're out of the league. So the fact that they can get an interview with the Patriots for the head coaching job arguably could help them land another job. So what do you do if you're them? If you turn down the interview, you might not get another interview this offseason. So tell me what they could have done. Just shut it down and say thanks, but no thanks? They want to get on that list. They want to coach, right? They want to have a living. So to get in front of an NFL owner is a very good opportunity for them. But it's not as if the Patriots are interviewing those 2 guys because they believe they're legitimate head coaching candidates, because they're just not. And nobody would tell you that. Nobody would tell you that. Not even Hamilton or Leftwich would tell you that. So that's why they take the interviews. Now, let's look at the fact that the no NFL head coaching experience with Leftwich and Hamilton is obviously somewhat of an issue. Some people would say, well, Nick, maybe they're interviewing Pep Hamilton and Leftwich because they'll be considered for the offensive staff, whichever the head coach is, right? Whoever comes in to be that head coach, maybe they'll hire Hamilton, maybe they'll hire Leftwich, maybe. Leftwich has been an offensive coordinator, worked with Tom Brady in Tampa. Of course, Tom Brady is friends with Vrabel, and you can kind of, connect the dots between that, and maybe Leftwich would get some kind of a job on this staff. I know people down in Tampa do not think very highly of Byron Leftwich. Does that mean he can't coach? I don't know. So maybe he could get a quarterback's coach job. Maybe Pep Hamilton, who's been an offensive coordinator in the league and has been, worked with quarterbacks time and time again. So yes, maybe those guys, they interview because they could get a shot at some kind of coaching position on this coaching roster, whoever comes in to lead this group, whether it's Ben Johnson, Mike Vrabel, or maybe somebody else, a mystery candidate that we haven't heard about. That's absolutely on the table. But what I would say is they don't have to interview this week. They don't have to interview right now. Now, usually, if you look at guys and you think they could be coordinators, you think they could be coaches, the head coach usually is in charge of bringing the staff in. And I know this is very different from what we just saw because Gerard Mayo had 0.0 of a Rolodex and Elliot Wolf had to hire almost the entire staff. But Mike Vrabel, Ben Johnson, they walk in to the office of Robert Kraft, or Ben Johnson zooms into the office of Robert Kraft. They have their list. They say, this is who I want to bring in as the OC. This is who I'm bringing in as the DC. And they have the list of coaches that they want to work with, that they want to bring into the program. So, when you look at how these things usually work out, it doesn't usually mean, the owner speaks to somebody and then the owner says, hey, I talked to Pep Hamilton and I was very impressed by Pep. I think you should name him the offensive coordinator. No chance. No chance that happens. Ben Johnson already knows who he wants, right? To be his DC, to be his OC, because he probably would have an OC, not that he would be calling the plays as the OC. But Mike Vrabel knows who he wants as the OC, DC, special teams coordinator, all that kind of stuff, right? Now, you might take interviews with Pep Hamilton. You might take an interview with Byron Leftwich, just like you might take an interview with Alex Van Pelt if he's still on contract here and you want to talk to him about Drake May, maybe get a feel for the vibe between those two guys. But an owner is not going to, talk to a potential candidate for the head coaching job like Pep or Byron and then go to Vrabel and say, I got your guy. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So when you look at why this is all happening the way it's happening, it's because of trying to expedite the process. That's what the Krafts are doing. They're not trying to interview as many people as they can. They don't want to have a thorough process. That's what I wanted. I wanted a thorough process. I've said this from the beginning. I said this last year with Gerard Mayo before we found out about the succession plan, and I said it after Mayo was fired on Sunday. I believe I said it on Monday. I wanted a thorough process. I wanted them to interview as many of the best candidates that they could interview. And I'll tell you why coming up in a little bit. But it's rather obvious the Patriots are not going that route. The Krafts are not going that route. The Krafts got the two minority candidates into the building yesterday, got that done, interviewing Vrabel tomorrow, interviewing Ben Johnson on Friday, and I would imagine a decision would come up pretty quickly after Ben Johnson's interview on Friday. They're trying to expedite this process because if they weren't trying to act so fast and get this done quickly, they had plenty of guys they could have interviewed, folks. You could interview plenty of other minorities who are legitimate head coach candidates that have been head coaches in the league. They could have interviewed Robert Saleh. They didn't. They could interview Aaron Glenn this week. They didn't. They could reach out to Brian Flores and let them know that they're interested in Brian Flores. Flores said yesterday he has not heard from the Patriots. So they're not reaching out to any of these legitimate candidates that are minorities, which just makes it look like, which I think is what it is, we're just running through this process. We brought Pep in, we brought Byron Leftwich in because we had to bring them in due to that league mandate, due to that league rule. But they could have interviewed these other guys, and they decided not to. Anthony Weaver is another name, Miami's defensive coordinator. Miami's defense had a very good year. He has a background from Baltimore, which makes him interesting, right? Mike McDonald went from Baltimore, D.C. to Seattle head coach. Seattle had a pretty good year as far as, under rookie head coaches go. So they could have talked to Anthony Weaver, but they didn't talk to any of those guys. And they haven't reached out to any of those guys. They have no interest to talk to any of those guys, including Flores, which is interesting because Flores obviously has a link here to New England, has been a head coach in the league before, strung together, a pretty good record in Miami, given the situation. You would imagine he's been very successful in Minnesota as the DC, had a good time in Pittsburgh under Mike Tomlin. You'd imagine that in the very least, Brian Flores would be contacted and the Krafts would tell Flores, we're interested in talking to you. But that hasn't even happened. The text, the phone call was never sent out to Brian Flores, which tells you they're trying to get this thing done quickly. They want to get it done. That's the number one goal. The number one goal is not to go through a vetting process. It's not to talk to the best possible candidates aside from the top two guys. Again, I do not sit here and tell you that I'll be unhappy if Vrabel or Johnson get hired. They're the top two candidates in this cycle. I get it. I will be happy ultimately, but I'm not happy with the process. This is the second straight time this team has needed a head coach, and I find the process to be fugazi. I don't think they had a process last time with the Mayo stuff. We all know that. And I think they are sprinting through this process just to get the job done. And I don't agree with that approach. I just don't agree with it. There are a lot of guys you can go out there and talk to. Talk to all of them, even if it's just a Zoom interview. Even if you want to get things done quickly. Like, you can still get this done quickly, but have more interviews. Are they not busy at Gillette Stadium? They interviewed Leftwich and Hamilton yesterday. They're interviewing Mike Vrabel tomorrow and Ben Johnson on Friday. You couldn't fit any interviews into today's schedule? You couldn't do more than one interview tomorrow or one interview on Friday? Look at what the Saints are doing. Look at what the Raiders are doing. They're interviewing a bunch of guys over the next couple of days. The Patriots are not treating it that way. They're just sprinting through this thing. That's what they want. And to me, and I'm sure many of you would agree with this, Mike Vrabel is their guy. Mike Vrabel is their guy, and they feel very confident. They are near certain that Mike Vrabel will say yes. I don't know if I would go as far as saying they feel like they've got Vrabel in their back pocket, but the nature of this search and how they're conducting business certainly makes you feel like they feel Vrabel's in their back pocket. Vrabel's their guy. I mean, let's think about the timeline, okay? Let's think about the timeline and how all of this has unfolded. After the Arizona game, that debacle, we get leaks of Mike Vrabel's interest in New England. Then the Patriots go to Buffalo. It's a competitive game. And for whatever reason, wink, wink, that week, we don't really hear anything about Mike Vrabel and the Patriots. We don't hear much from Vrabel. We don't hear much from the Patriots' interest in Vrabel. After that Buffalo game for that week, it was pretty much, for all intents and purposes, radio silence. Then you get to the Chargers game. Patriots are humiliated at home, beat 40-7. It's a brutal scene at Gillette. What happens following that game? That week following the game, we not only find out that Mike Vrabel would be interested in the Patriots job, but Tony Pauline comes out with Sportskeeda, and he reports that Mike Vrabel's number one job is the Patriots gig. It's the one that he wants. Do you think that's a coincidence? Do you think it's a coincidence that we hear a bunch of Vrabel Patriot stuff after that Arizona game? Then we don't hear anything after the Buffalo game in Buffalo. But then after that Chargers debacle at home, you heard that Vrabel had the Patriots at the top of his list. I do not find that to be coincidental. Then what happens after the Chargers, right? After the Chargers game, you've got the Monday of week 18. The Monday of week 18, Vrabel gets out of his Cleveland contract. So Vrabel goes to the Browns and says, get me out of the contract. Can I get out of this contract? The reason why he does that is because, as I said earlier, he can get a leg up on everybody else, and he gets to interview in person with these organizations. So he gets out of his contract on the Monday of week 18. On the Friday of week 18, what does Vrabel do? He goes to the Jets. He interviews with the Jets, putting more pressure on the Crafts. And then Sunday, after the win against Buffalo, what happens? Not only is Gerard Mayo let go, Gerard Mayo is let go within 90 minutes of that win on Sunday. Then on Monday, we hear that Ben Johnson, the interview request has been put in. So we find out that Ben Johnson will interview this week. Then yesterday morning, we find out that Vrabel, his interview has been set up for this week. And now we find out that Vrabel is going to happen first. He's going to be in here tomorrow. Johnson is on Friday. Tuesday afternoon, the Patriots satisfy the Rooney Rule. So put all of those pieces together. Put all the pieces together. Arizona game goes bad. Vrabel's talking. Buffalo game doesn't go as bad. Vrabel stops talking. Chargers game's a debacle. Vrabel's talk intensifies. The Patriots are the job. That's the job that I want. That's what he's telling people close to him, right? Then Monday of week 18, right after that Chargers game, Monday, week 18, what do you got? Vrabel gets out of his Cleveland contract so he can talk to teams in person. Then the Friday, he goes to the Jets. The Friday right before the final home game of the season, goes to the Jets, the hated rival, right? Shakes his tuchus. Says, look at me, I'm interviewing with the Jets on the Friday before the final game. Sunday, right after the game, Kraft says, you're gone to Mayo. Monday, Ben Johnson interview is leaked. Tuesday morning, Vrabel interview is leaked. Tuesday afternoon, satisfy the Rooney Rule. I mean, unless there is a huge catastrophe during Mike Vrabel's interview tomorrow, he, I believe, is going to be the head coach of this football team. I think he will be the head coach of the Patriots. I think the Chargers game was Mayo's death knell. The back channels with Vrabel began soon after that Chargers game. If they hadn't started before then, Kraft knew they could get their top target. He pulled the trigger fast on Mayo because he wanted to get through this process as fast as possible. Wanted to get this done ASAP, which is why you interview not one, but two guys yesterday that satisfy the Rooney Rule. You satisfy the Rooney Rule in one day. Whoop, see ya. Then we move on to Vrabel. Then we move on to Johnson. We interview Ben Johnson because, hey, everybody loves Ben Johnson. If we interview Ben Johnson, it looks like it is, a great idea and that we're serious about this because we interviewed a couple guys earlier in the week. We get the Johnson interview done. But when we sit down with Vrabel on Thursday, I think it's going to be a conversation of, what do you want, Mike? Mike's going to tell him what he wants, and they're going to say yes or no. They'll get through the Zoom interview on Friday with Ben Johnson, and then we'll find out that Mike Vrabel is the head coach of the New England Patriots. That's how it feels like this is going to go. And that's why it's gone so quickly. That's why it's happened. And by the way, the nature of this search also tells you, the Elliott Wolf, Alonzo Highsmith thing, not really a big deal, right? Like, how much do you think those two guys had to be involved with this process? I'd imagine Elliott Wolf might have led the interview with Pep Hamilton. Maybe Highsmith led the interview with Byron Leftwich. And then tomorrow, the heavy hitters will all be in the room for Mike Vrabel. And then after Vrabel tomorrow, the heavy hitters will be in on the Zoom with Ben Johnson. And then it'll be done. It'll be either Mike Vrabel or it'll be Ben Johnson. And this thing will be over just like that. I mean, if it's not Vrabel, then it's going to be Ben Johnson or bust, right? That's what it looks like. Now, of course, the Crafts can go back. They can talk to other people. But it certainly looks like Vrabel's number one, Johnson's number two. The Patriots will end up with one of those two guys, which, again, I think Patriots fans should be happy and excited about landing either of those guys. I would take either of them. Vrabel's top's on my list, but I would take either of them, and I think it's reason for excitement that if you land one of those two guys. But I don't think this is a serious, thorough coaching search. This is, we want Vrabel. We feel like we can have Vrabel. Let's do what we got to do, get all this stuff done, and then we're going to move on. Right? That's what it feels like. Bill Meehan, going to call me out. Tuning out Cattles. Bill. The argument for dozens of interviews with coordinators and allowing the guy you want more time with other teams just doesn't make sense. Bill, you can do both, bro. You can do both. They could have talked to these other guys and then hired Vrabel or hired Johnson. You can do both. Again, they interviewed Hamilton and Leftwich yesterday. They're interviewing nobody today. They're interviewing Vrabel and nobody else tomorrow, and then Ben Johnson and nobody else on Friday. This isn't either or, Bill. If you wanted Mike Vrabel as your number one guy, cool. Hire him by Friday if you want. Hire him on Saturday, whatever. You could have still talked to more people this week. It's disingenuous to just say, oh, to allow Mike Vrabel more time. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying let Mike Vrabel, run around the country for the next 3 weeks. But you certainly could have interviewed more people. Absolutely. Absolutely could have interviewed more people. And I named names earlier. There's no excuse. This is not a thorough head coach search. And I'm not a fan of that. I'm being consistent. I wanted them to speak to many, many candidates, whether it was 5, 6, 7 legitimate candidates. And that's not what they're doing. They checked the box of the Rooney Rule, and then they moved on to Vrabel and Johnson, and that's it. And I'll tell you why I wanted that process in a minute. Because people might say, who cares if you end up with Vrabel? Who cares if you end up with Ben Johnson? I'll tell you why I care. You might not care. I'll tell you why I care in a couple of minutes. But it looks like it's going to be Vrabel or Johnson, which tells me that Robert Kraft is ready to offer them whatever they want, right? Like if you're approaching this head coach search like they are, then you are willing to give Mike Vrabel, Ben Johnson, whatever they want. Unless you want to get back into the process, which now you just wasted a week for all intents and purposes because you didn't interview more people than Vrabel and Johnson. So this puts Robert Kraft in the corner. These guys have all the leverage in the world. So I would imagine that Kraft is going to offer the moon to both of them or whichever one he wants to hire. The conversation with Mike Vrabel tomorrow, again, might be, what do you want, Mike? Mike says, this is what I want. Kraft says, we can do that. Boom, deal done. Because it's either that or Kraft is delusional because he's not doing a thorough search. And it feels like Ben Johnson would need an absolute grand slam on Friday via Zoom for the Patriots to walk away from Vrabel because of what Bill mentioned in his comment. Because if you want to hire Ben Johnson and you want to wait throughout this process, Ben Johnson's going to interview with other teams over the weekend. You got to sit back and wait for like 3 weeks until you can talk to Ben Johnson in person. And then you're going to hire him in like late January, early February. So Ben Johnson has to hit a grand slam on Friday for the Patriots to allow Mike Vrabel to just go elsewhere, interview at other places, possibly lose Vrabel, and hope that you can land Johnson at the end of the process weeks from now, which of course also slows down your offseason planning. So Ben Johnson would have to have the best interview of all time, I think, for the Crafts to not want Mike Vrabel. He's got to have the best interview in the history of interviews. And by the way, speaking of Vrabel, I don't know how many of you saw this yesterday, but Rand Carthon, who was the GM down in Tennessee, and that was really the beginning of the end with Vrabel down in Tennessee. Vrabel did not want to work with Rand Carthon. He wanted his guy, Ryan Cowden, to lead the front office. Ownership in Tennessee said, no, we're going to stick with Rand Carthon. Vrabel was gone. Well, now Vrabel's gone and Carthon's gone. Tennessee fired Carthon yesterday. So it looks like Mike Vrabel might have been right about Rand Carthon. And maybe the Tennessee Titans should have listened to Mike Vrabel because now they have a complete unknown at head coach in Brian Callahan, and now they're scrambling with no quarterback and no GM. So something to think about when you think about Vrabel's history in Tennessee. All right, why does the coach search matter to me? And I also want to get to a couple of reports on Gerard Mayo behind the scenes, which we've had come out the last couple of days. But first, let's go to a super chat. And don't forget, help us out here. Like, comment, and subscribe. That's how we drive this algorithm on YouTube. More thumbs up. That will help us on this YouTube channel. Don't forget to comment how you feel about the search. Do you want Vrabel? Do you want Johnson? It looks like it's going to be one of those two guys. Which one would you rather want and why? Throw a comment in. Throw a question in. Don't forget to subscribe. And don't forget Super Chats if you want to jump to the front of the line. Vitalics, Chad Graff reports are damning for Mayo. Yeah, we'll get more in depth on those. Cards on the plane after losses, booting Belichick's son for his buddy Covington Eek. I have a couple of different feelings about those anecdotes in the story from Graff today. Some might disagree with how I feel about a couple of things in that story, but certainly there were things in that story that should bother plenty of people. And there's actually two things in that story that bother me more than the card playing on the plane and Steve Belichick. So I'll get to those in a little bit. Anonymous, $10 super chat. Thank you for the 10. Nick, do you think Vrabel to the Raiders because of Tom Brady is a real possibility? I think it's a possibility, but I always go back to the quarterback. Mike Vrabel wants a quarterback or a path to a quarterback. His easiest path is with Drake May. His easiest path is here in New England, right? I mean, New Orleans, question mark at quarterback. Vegas, question mark at quarterback. Chicago, of course, with Caleb Williams. That's an option. But you look at Vegas, and can they get a quarterback? They can probably pitch Vrabel on the idea of trading for J.J. McCarthy. Maybe they could try to pitch him on Sam Darnold. How does he feel about Darnold after watching Sunday night's game? What if Darnold plays like crap in the playoffs? How much of Darnold's success has to do with Darnold? How much does it have to do with Kevin O'Connell and, those receivers that they have, and Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison? So it's a possibility, but if I'm Vrabel, I'm still looking at this job and saying, well, they've got Drake May. They've got an ownership that I know, that I get along with, that I'm comfortable with. The Crafts will listen to me. And as much as Brady is in Vegas, Brady's not the majority owner. It's still Mark Davis. And Mark Davis doesn't have a ton of money. The Crafts have more money than Mark Davis. So it's a possibility. I would leave the door open, but I still think Vrabel would pick the Patriots over the Raiders. Terry with a $20 super chat. Thank you, Terry. Predicting Vrabel is hired tomorrow. Ben Johnson does not get an interview. Another breaking news pod. Yeah, well, as soon as the head coach news comes out, we're going to do a breaking pod. There's no doubt about that. There will be a breaking news podcast. Unless it comes out on Sunday afternoon, because I'm working at 98.5 on Sunday afternoon with Mark Dondero. But yeah, as soon as that comes out, if it comes out tomorrow, if it comes out Friday, we will do a breaking news podcast. I think they will interview Ben Johnson, even if it's just out of courtesy. And again, I think the Crafts want to provide the perception, at least, that Vrabel wasn't always the leader and it wasn't a fait accompli. And the best way you do that is by interviewing Ben Johnson, because you can just point out, hey, we interviewed Ben Johnson, the other guy that everybody was talking about. We interviewed the top two candidates and we picked the one that we wanted. That's an easier sell job than interviewing with Vrabel and then not interviewing with Ben Johnson. We just find out that Vrabel's the guy. It might happen that way. It could certainly happen that way. I just think they will still interview Ben Johnson. I believe that's how it'll go down. But I do think we find out by Friday afternoon, Friday evening, that Mike Vrabel's the head coach. All right, so before we get to the Mayo story, just a couple things about why the search matters to me. Number one, when you limit the field that you interview, when you limit the scope of the head coaching search, you are limiting the opportunity to compare your favorites to the field, right? You don't know who might surprise you. I know a lot of people bring up the Ken Whisenhunt, Mike Tomlin example in Pittsburgh. Whisenhunt was supposed to be the guy. They interviewed Tomlin. Tomlin knocked it out of the park, and they ended up hiring Tomlin instead of Whisenhunt. So you might go in with a plan, but if you honor the process and you interview, let's say 5 or 6 guys, let's say it was Ben Johnson, Vrabel, Brian Flores, Liam Cohen, Aaron Glenn. Let's say you interviewed 5 or 6 of the top candidates. Well, now you're able to stack those candidates against the ones that were your favorites going in. But you could change your mind, right? I mean, you could change your mind and say, well, we want a former head coach. We want that experience. We thought we wanted Vrabel, but man, Brian Flores was spectacular with his interview. And you limit that opportunity to compare and contrast the candidates when you have so few candidates. They have 2 legitimate candidates, if we're being honest. So bringing in other people, you might find some stuff out, which leads me to my next point. A thorough process allows you to vet other coaches, to gather information, to gather intelligence. How do they see offense evolving in the NFL? How do they see defense evolving in the NFL? How do they run a certain program, right? For example, what has Brian Flores learned under Mike Tomlin and under Kevin O'Connell? Would you not want to get that information as the Crafts? Is that not valuable information? What is different about Minnesota's operation than our operation? And so I just think that that's important. You get different ideas, you get different philosophies. And even if you're not going to hire those guys, even if you're going to stand by your top guy in Mike Vrabel, you have at least gathered more information and intelligence about other philosophies and how other teams approach game week, game planning. And I know Burt Breer's been all over this, but, modernizing the franchise, the front office, analytics department, sports science, like you want to get all of that information, and limiting the amount of people you talk to limits the amount of information that you get. And if Mike Vrabel thinks similarly to you, then you're not going to add to your program, right? You're not going to evolve or develop the program. So I just think it's very important. That's for any job opening. When I was a program director in Sacramento, I interviewed a bunch of people. I looked at a bunch of tape. I listened to a bunch of demos. And I spoke to at least 5 or 6 people. And I had my favorites. But I spoke to 5 or 6 people, at least 5 or 6, because, hey, I had my favorites going in. But maybe I have a conversation with a host, and that host wows me. And I go, man, oh, man, that's somebody that's impressive. And there was somebody who wowed me. And they climbed up my list. They moved up on my list for prospective co-hosts when I was hiring an afternoon co-host. So you want to just talk to a lot of people. You want to talk to a lot of people and gather the information and then make the best decision you can. If you limit the information, you're limiting your decision in a way, because you haven't talked to a lot of different people. And I do think this could impact the Kraft's reputation. I mean, they had no process last year with the succession language, and it is a sketchy coaching search this year. Now, none of that would matter, or none of it will matter if Mike Vrabel or Ben Johnson come in and crush it, and they're here for 10 years, and then Jonathan Kraft is the owner of the team. But I just think you don't lose anything by interviewing more people. You honestly don't. If you want to get Vrabel done by Friday or Saturday, you want to get Ben Johnson done by Saturday, I get it. Totally get it. You want to nail down one of the top 2 candidates, Vrabel's your guy, but it doesn't hurt. There's nothing that would be hurt by interviewing 5 or 6 more guys this week. So I really don't get it. Honestly, don't get it. All right, like, comment, subscribe. Let's get to these 2 Gerard Mayo reports before I bid you adieu. Some information, some behind-the-scenes information leaking out. This always happens when somebody gets popped, and it has begun to happen to Gerard Mayo. So Mike Giardi at Boston Sports Journal wrote the following. Locker room murmurings picked up steam as the season wore on. Questions about game plans, in-game adjustments or lack thereof, player utilization, inconsistent messaging, and a tolerance for spring and summer mistakes being made in the fall left several players wondering if they were in the most capable hands. Here's what one veteran Patriot told Giardi, quote, "I lost faith we were headed in the right direction." Giardi asked that vet when. The vet said in the spring. Giardi asked why in the spring. The vet said, felt like they were making it up as they went along. It was amazing how one day it would be this, and then the next something completely different. So a veteran, an NFL veteran, in that locker room said, I gave up on this coaching staff in the spring. In the spring. By camp time, this vet was done. This vet was like, you kidding me? And what he tells Giardi is, why was he done by then? Why was he done so quickly? Because Gerard Mayo and the staff, they would constantly change. One day they would say something and say, this is what we want to do. Then the next day it was completely different. It really felt like they were throwing crap up against the wall. And so the veteran was like, what are we doing? They're making this stuff up as they go along. They have no plan. They have no idea what they're doing. This is literally just flying by the seat of their pants. I don't believe in these guys. Another player Another player said to Giardi, it became more about looking at myself in the mirror and the guys in my room and huddling and saying, I'm leaving it out here for you because I never believed we had an edge in coaching. This locker room, at least some of this locker room, had zero belief in this coaching staff. They looked at these guys and said, we don't have a chance. We're going to win this game if we play well, but we don't have a chance. This staff is not setting us up to succeed. They don't know what the hell they're doing. I'm out on these guys. Not the entire locker room, but at least some. More from Giardi. The front office believed that the younger players on the roster had not grown and developed nearly enough. Jalen Polk was identified by many organizations as a plug-and-play guy. So Giardi's telling us that his reporting is that many organizations throughout the league felt like Jalen Polk was a dude that you can just plop on the field and he was going to contribute right away in his rookie season. That obviously didn't happen. And Giardi writes that Elliott Wolf, the front office, they thought Jalen Polk would immediately contribute. So Giardi writes, to see Polk regress to the point where he became a liability and a non-factor raised eyebrows, not just upstairs, but around the league. So this isn't just coming from the Patriots. It's not just coming from the Patriots staff. People around the league are telling Giardi, why is Jalen Polk completely useless? That's not the guy that we scouted. That's not the guy that we thought would make an immediate contribution. What's going on in New England? What's happening to that dude? That dude should have given you something. And Giardi says, Polk wasn't the only one. There was regression as well. And I had a show with Matt McCarthy last week on 98.5, and Matt did a great job of trying to frame my opinion as if I was trying to excuse Elliott Wolf and keep him here in New England. I've said it plenty of times. I would move on from Wolf. Whoever you hire as the head coach should have the say as far as who's going to be his guy in personnel, and they should work together, and that's the way it should move forward, okay? My point, though, with Matt on 98.5 that day was it's really difficult for me to evaluate the rookie class that was actually out there and playing, or even the guys that didn't have a chance to play much, like Javon Baker. It's tough for me to truly evaluate the young players because how much was it the fact that it was on the player, right? Certainly some, if not most, is on the player. They didn't do a good enough job. They didn't take it seriously enough. They have immaturity problems, whatever it is. How much of it is on the player? How much of it is on Elliott Wolf and his evaluation and the front office's evaluation? But also, how much is it on the coaching staff? I mean, you look at the rookies that actually developed and improved. You got Drake May, Joe Milton looked better, Del Pettis developed, the undrafted free agent safety. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Joe Milton and Drake May had Alex Van Pelt, Ben McAdoo, and T.C. McCartney to work with, guys that are actually experienced working with quarterbacks and have helped develop quarterbacks. I don't think that's a coincidence, and I don't think Del Pettis improving through the year is a coincidence when you have Brian Belichick coaching the safeties, because that's what he's done for years. So how much of Jalen Polk's awful bust of a rookie season, how much was it on we just missed on the player versus he had Tyler Hughes as his position coach, a guy who hadn't coached a position above junior college? So how much of it? I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's a reasonable question. And that's what Giardi is saying. People are asking the same question in the league and in that building. They're asking the same question. Is Jalen Polk just a bust? Is he a waste? Is he never going to be good? Did he have no chance of being good? Or did our coaching and the quarterback play of Jacoby Brissett, did that kind of just ruin him early in the year and it went off the rails? And we had a coaching staff, we had a wide receivers coach that couldn't get him back on the rails because the wide receivers coach had no idea what the hell he was doing. I don't know. There's no doubt he was a bust. So it's trying to figure out. And what I would say is, what's critical to this is that veterans on this team, they regressed, which would also point to some of the coaching issues. So if you have veterans who you have trusted in the past, they are regressing, then wouldn't it stand to reason that maybe some of the young guys didn't develop? They didn't progress because of the coaching? I think it's a worthwhile conversation, and I don't think people are talking about it. I think it's all just Elliott Wolf sucks, the roster sucks, everything sucks. It's a contextual, nuanced conversation. But I do think there could be multiple factors as to why a guy like Jalen Polk looks like he's going to be at least solid, even if he's a number 3 in the NFL. He looks like he's going to be solid, and then looks the way he looked this year. Let's get to Chad Graff's story in The Athletic on Mayo. Graff writes, after the Arizona game, on the long plane ride back, most of Mayo's assistants grabbed their laptops and studied cut-ups from the loss, the customary move for NFL coaches during the return flight after games. But in a move that surprised some at the front of the plane after such a lopsided loss, according to a team source, Mayo left his spot near the front and went back to where some players had gathered to play cards, choosing to hang out there while his assistants watched film. So you just had a bad game in Arizona coming off the bye week. You're on the plane flying back, and the coaching staff near the front of the plane, they're looking at their laptops. They're looking at, I'm sure, their tablets, and they're going through some of the game film, what went wrong, what the hell just happened to us. Mayo gets up. He walks to the back of the plane where the players are, where they're playing cards. Now, as Graft writes, on a night when the frustration over a terrible performance had some wondering if their jobs were about to be in jeopardy, it was surprising to at least one person at the front of the plane to see the head coach mingling with players in such a casual way. So the coaches are like, are we going to get fired? Because we just got off the bye week and we just did that. Yikes. We might be done. Meanwhile, Mayo gets up and walks to the back of the plane to hang out with the players. Now, Lou Merloni, who I trust with this kind of thing, said, playing cards is different than if he's just out in the back talking to the guys. And I would agree with that. Like, if Mayo is sitting down playing cards with them, it's a really, really bad thing. But if he's just back there trying to, catch the vibe of the team and he's talking to guys about how he feels or how they feel, and what happened and all of that. I don't think it's the biggest issue. Like, if you just want to check on your guys after a bad loss when they're on the plane, not a huge issue. But if you're back there for like hours, if you're back there playing cards, then it's a bigger issue to me. So, there's a little bit of nuance and there's a little bit of a difference between, playing cards or hanging out in the back for 20 minutes with the guys just to catch up. On how they feel and what they're thinking. There's more consequential stuff in the story, but I just saw Burt Breer tweet something. This is good. And of course, it happens 48 minutes into this podcast, and most people will already have turned this off, and they will miss this part, and there will be a bunch of comments yelling at me about this coaching search. As I said at the beginning, and there's a reason why I said it. Things can change. Things are fluid with coaching searches. Burt Breer just tweeted out that the Patriots have put in a request to interview Aaron Glenn. Glenn played for Belichick in the 90s. That's good. That makes me feel better. That makes me feel better about the search. At least we have another name. At least we have a name of a minority who is a legitimate head coach candidate in the NFL this year. So that makes me feel much better. Now, if I wanted to create controversy, I could say, oh, are they interviewing Aaron Glenn because everybody was saying what I said earlier? But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give the Crafts the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to give them credit. So good on them. Good on them that we have another name. And maybe there will be another name added to this. So I like that. That's a better situation. Now that you've got Ben Johnson. So you've got Ben Johnson, you've got Mike Vrabel, and now you've got Aaron Glenn. You have three legitimate coaching candidates as part of this search. And maybe another name or two will come out. I wish this came out before I started this podcast and went, 30 minutes on how this search doesn't look like it's a serious search because it's not thorough enough. Wish it happened before, but that's why. Words matter. And if people were listening at the beginning of the podcast, I said, this can change. It is fluid. But right now, this looks like they're just trying to run through this thing. So I'm happy that they are interviewing Aaron Glenn. That's a positive step. And maybe we'll get another name or two that comes out. But good. Bring more people into the circle. Talk to more people. This is precisely what they should be doing. This is exactly what I want. I want Vrabel. Wouldn't mind Johnson. But talk to some other candidates that are legitimate candidates. So I'm happy that happened. And at least, I will say this, at least they have 3 candidates, and at least they're gathering some intel from Aaron Glenn and looking at things defensively and maybe, I don't know, philosophies or whatever, like I said. So that's a positive. It's a step in the right direction. I still think Vrabel will end up being the guy. All right, let's wrap up with the rest of the Chad Graff article on Jerod Mayo, because I think there's more consequential stuff than the poker game that was happening or whatever the hell in the back of the room. In describing how and why things went wrong, team sources pointed to a few things. Mayo tried too hard to be 180 degrees different from Belichick, then struggled to apply and uphold discipline after positioning himself as a player's coach. Mayo, according to team sources with knowledge of the situation, struggled with discipline and how to enforce it. This is important. Before the Patriots' Week 17 game against the Chargers, he told broadcast crews he was going to bench Ramondre Stevenson because of his recent fumbles. But when it was time to do so, Mayo had a change of heart. Quote, "I still don't know what happened with that," a team source said. "Honestly, Jerod is a good guy. I just don't think he was ready for all the big decisions and discipline and focus the job takes," unquote. Last week, Jelani Tavai criticized hometown fans. Graff writes, Mayo addressed the topic in a team meeting, essentially coaching the group on the proper way to phrase looming questions on the issue. A few hours later, Tavai doubled down on his original comments. He never apologized. And I actually said that in real time. He talked to Tavai after Tavai made those comments on the radio. He talked to Tavai, and then Tavai comes out and doubles down. And I said in real time, right? I said at the time, that's not good. Not only is it not good to double down on what he said because it's just bad, but it was also bad because Mayo told us all that he had a conversation with Tavai. So that meant that Tavai didn't pick up what the coach put down or didn't just didn't want to listen to him. And that's Jelani Tavai, who's been in the league for, a number of years. He's one of the veterans in the locker room. And that's what this story is telling us. It's telling us that, Jerod had a team meeting and said, guys, when you're asked about the fans, this is how we have to handle it. Tavai left the room. He was asked about the fans, and he didn't take any of the advice from his head coach, which means he didn't listen to his head coach. And I'm sure Tavai wasn't the only guy in that locker room that didn't listen to Mayo or during these team meetings. It's very bad. It's very, very bad. And the fact that the Stevenson, Antonio Gibson thing, to this day, nobody knows why Jerod Mayo had a change of heart and decided to start Stevenson. This is bad stuff. And then finally, from day one, Mayo ran into issues, Chad Graff writes. It started while trying to build out his coaching staff. Defensive coordinator role. We all remember what happened, right? Steve Belichick was here, then he wasn't here, then it was DeMarcus Covington. Graff writes that Mayo was surprisingly decisive as far as the defensive coordinator job, even though Steve Belichick had been the Patriots' defensive play caller in recent years while they routinely boasted top 10 units. Mayo did not offer him the chance to continue calling plays. That's according to a team source. Mayo opted instead for DeMarcus Covington. Mayo offered Steve a lesser role, but the younger Belichick declined. So this was not a situation where Steve Belichick wanted out. He didn't necessarily want out. Gerard Mayo made the choice for Steve. He did not want Steve to continue as the play caller. He wanted to bring in Covington. He wanted to promote Covington to defensive coordinator and said, hey, if you want to hang around here, Steve, we'll offer you something less than the DC job. Now, I'm not surprised by this because I think, there would have been awkwardness with Steve still on the staff. I know Brian is still on the staff, but defensive coordinator versus safeties coach, it's a little bit of a different world, right? It's a little bit of a different world. So I would understand the idea of I don't want Bill Belichick, his son, to be my right-hand man when things went so bad between me and Bill. There could be a little bit of awkwardness, right? There would be awkwardness keeping Steve in a major role. It's obviously 100% the wrong football decision. DeMarcus Covington was a dumpster fire. Steve Belichick was great here and then went to Washington. And I think Washington's defense went from like 99th in the country to 25th in the country. So Steve Belichick is a really good defensive coordinator. But this is what happens, right? Gerard Mayo, he made his bed and he was left lying in that bed. Because of how he handled the Bill Belichick relationship, because he wanted to be the next coach, because that relationship fractured, he felt like he couldn't have Steve as the defensive coordinator, which hurt his football team. Ultimately, it hurt his football team. So this is some of the stuff when people say, "Oh, what about the talent? What about this? What about that?" Some of these things are Gerard Mayo's fault, if not many of them. If not many of these things. So because of how he handled himself behind closed doors in 2023, because of the contract succession language and the whole situation between, Bill Belichick and Gerard Mayo, because of all of that, at least partially because of it, it also could just be Mayo wanted Covington and that was it. It didn't really matter. But, I would also have to imagine that awkwardness made it even easier for Mayo to say, no, I'm going to go with Covington instead of Steve. And it hurt the team. It hurt the team. And it hurt Mayo. And now Mayo's gone. And who knows what happens with DeMarcus Covington. It's what happens. Right? You play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. All right, don't forget to give us that thumbs up. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It's rather obvious reading these stories that Gerard Mayo was completely in over his head. A lot of people pay attention to what happened on the field and the talent of the team. Don't overlook off the field stuff. It was a major reason why Gerard Mayo got fired last Sunday. The off the field stuff was a big deal. Lack of discipline, lack of culture, lack of messaging. And none of that stuff has to do with talent. Mayo failed in all of those. Will we have breaking news tomorrow? I don't know, because now we got Aaron Glenn's interview. Not sure when Aaron Glenn is going to be interviewing. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But if we do have breaking news tomorrow, I'll be all over it. If not, Friday could be it. If not, maybe it's Saturday. I appreciate every single one of you for joining me as always. Like, comment, subscribe. Let's continue to build this channel out. And enjoy your Wednesday night. Enjoy your hump day. Till next time, this is the Nick Cattle Show.